Hi there, welcome to the Quilt is Inspired YouTube channel. I'm Myhre and I'm coming to you from my home studio in Colorado because there is snow everywhere and I can't go anywhere. So I am home creating. So now the Gypsy Satchel is completed and I have a satchel for every ensemble now. I am also left with bits of fabric, threads, yarns, and beads. Now granted, some of these are small enough to justify throwing right into the trash bin, but when you look at these bits all together in a pile or in a Christmas cookie container thingy, they are so beautiful, and to me they just scream serendipitous potential. So for this video series, I want to show you one way to bust a whole bunch of scraps. You know, whether you did the Gypsy Satchel with us or not, you probably have bins of fabric pieces, yarns, beads, buttons as well. And so you could begin to gather and start your own color story. So a good way to do that is maybe pick a ball of yarn that's got some variegated colors that you like, or a piece of fabric that you really love, and begin to pull from what is in that fabric. Begin to pull, like I said, just threads and yarns, and they can be scraps, they can be small little balls that we can crochet with. In this first video, I'm going to show you 7 little motifs with the scraps that I have used from the Gypsy Satchel bag. So again, anything will do that you have. You know, using these things, we can make shapes that we never would have thought of had we not had this pile of scraps. So it's a very freeing way to create because there's really no pattern. These motifs are really fast. I'm going to go through them really quickly just to give you ideas of what to use in a pile of beautiful materials. So if it seems fast for you, of course, if you're watching on a PC, you can hit the space bar, or if you're watching on a device, just tap your screen and pause. By now, if you've done some of these videos and you have a bunch of scraps, I know you already know how to crochet, how to knit, how to quilt. So this series is not so much a tutorial on how to, it's what to do with these scraps, and I'll give as much detail as I can without going nuts and boring you with over detailed instructions. So how it'll work is the first 4 Sundays of December 2019 I will be releasing videos in different ways to use these scraps. The first one today's is motifs. Then on December 29th, I'm not sure what time yet. I don't know how to go live, so I have to figure that out. But I am going to go live and do a drawing. So I want to turn this into a contest. For every subscriber that makes a comment on each of the 4 videos, I'll pull a name. So that's 4 videos to come, 4 chances to put your name in, and then you'll receive, if you're a winner, you'll receive a mess kit, which is a well-coordinated pile of fabrics, beads, yarns, and threads from my studio to you, because I really want to encourage this to be sort of an interactive journey. Like, I want to hear from you too. I don't always know what I'm making until I start making and things pop into my head, and that happens and we get stuck on something. So definitely I want to hear from you. And just working on the previous videos and following the Mandala Unplugged Facebook group, how much we inspire each other and keep each other going and learn from each other. So that's what I want to turn this video series into. So I hope that you'll subscribe, follow along, comment, let us know how you're doing, and we can share and just do an improv journey together, the best kind. So again, for this video series, I'm going to show you 7 little motifs that I just sat around and made up, and I'm going to put them in a pile and let them speak to me, and let you speak to me. So enjoy, have fun, use up scraps. It feels so good to do that, and let me know how you're doing. In the Gypsy Satchel, we made these little buds. We did the fabric part of this, but this time I want to show you how to do the little crocheted base for them. So start by a small square of fabric and just cut it into a circle. Save that scrap. And then thread a needle with a double strand of polyester thread, and take that circle and with the wrong sides together, fold it in half, and then mark a crease across the top, and then fold that half into thirds as I'm showing here. And then take your needle and just run it through all 6 layers of fabric, and then do a running stitch along the arc on the bottom, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And you can see I'm doing this a little bit differently and narrating what I did because, to be totally honest with you, I was binge watching Survivor as I was taping these. So we'll try it this way and see what happens. So anyway, once you get all the way to the end, of course, you're going to gather it, hold it in place, and tie a really tight knot. And then you're going to come back around and go through all of those layers again just to make sure that that bud stays bud-like. Right? And then tie a knot on the other side of that piece. Okay, and then now you have your bed shape. And there's a right side and a wrong side. You can see that the right side has sort of you can see the fold coming down. Leave the sewing thread on the bud and set the bud aside for now. This is done with thread B, what you did your lazy daisies on the stem with, but of course this is just sock yarn. I think the hook is a 1.75 millimeter. Chain 2, do 3 double crochets into the ring, chain 2, and then slip stitch. And then pull the circle so that you have it gathered down at the bottom. And this is like kind of a 1/2 or 1/4 magic ring, right? So you can see this little seashell. And now, just to keep that shell in place, you're going to tie a knot between the 2 threads. Okay, and then put the raw edges of the bud underneath them. Okay, and you left the sewing thread on the bud, so you're going to use that to stitch the bud into place. Okay, so basically what we're doing here is just stitching the edges of the bud, the ends of the bud, all behind the little crocheted piece that you made. So you can go through the middle, pick it up. You won't be able to see, obviously, the thread. And just get it locked up in there. So yeah, you can pull it through here and then just sink it right back down. Just go through it a few times so it's secure. And then rethread your tails. And same thing, you're going to just weave it up the side. And then in the back, almost make a little encasement. You pick up the other side of the base of the bud. And you see what I'm doing here, just making a little case to hold the fabric bud in place. Do that with the other side, and then clip it. And then you have your little buds. And these are really fun and quick to make and can do so much for a quilt. The next piece we're going to make is this little lacy flower. So what I thought would be fun is I had some of these buds out and I'm thinking about what to do, some ideas for these little motifs that I'm making. This could be the center of a mandala. If it's a 5-petal flower, and then we could just spoke out from there. So this takes about 3 to 4 yards of pearl cotton size 8. And you're going to start with a magic ring. Okay, grab that, gently take your fingers out and chain to lock the ring in place. Work 10 single crochets into the ring and pull the end to gather it. Find the first single crochet that you did and slip stitch to join. Pull that string a little bit, get that circle good and tight. Okay, we're going to chain 2 here and work a double crochet right into the same spot as you joined it. Two double crochets coming out of there. Chain 2, skip a stitch, and work 2 double crochets into the next stitch. Chain 2, skip a stitch, work 2 double crochets into the next stitch. Continue that until you're all the way around, and by doing a chain 2 and slip stitch into the top of the first chain 2 that you did. Now in every chain space, you're going to work a single crochet, a half double crochet, a double crochet, half double crochet, and a single crochet in every chain space. When you get to the 2 spokes of the double crochets in the previous round, insert your hook into the middle of them and then work a slip stitch. Okay, so in every space around, this is a smaller hook. It's a 1.25 millimeter, but just play around. You know, everybody crochets a little bit differently. So as long as you're getting a nice product where it's not too loose, you know, you can it's firm and it's taking shape, you're good to go. And just match, you can do this method, of course, you can do with any thread and any hook. Just match your hook to the yarn or thread size to get the flower that you like. When you come to the end, slip stitch in between those last 2 double crochets, and we're going to work picots. So in every stitch, you're going to do a slip stitch. So in the first single crochet, work a slip stitch, and then chain 3. In the half double crochet, slip stitch, chain 3. And this is putting the little frilly edge, they're called picots, along the petals. So as you can see, I'm just making a slip stitch with a chain 3 in between every stitch. Okay, and then when you reach the single crochet of that petal, just don't do the picot here. It's going to be too crowded. Just work a slip stitch into the slip stitch of the previous round. Work a slip stitch into the single crochet, and then begin your chain 3 picots along the petal. When you get all the way around, slip stitch into the beginning slip stitch, cut it, pull the thread through, and then weave the tails into the back, and then clip the threads. Here's that fun, fancy little flower. As long as we're doing magic rings and flowers, we'll continue on. We've got that same sock yarn and a different size hook this time. Mix it up. It's probably, I think it's a size 1, US size 1. Make a magic ring. Chain 1 to lock it in place. And then you're going to work 8 single crochets into the ring. Pull it together. Make a slip stitch in that first single crochet to join it. Okay, and then chain 2 For your double crochet, chain an extra 1 for the space in between. Do a double crochet in every stitch, all 8 of them, with a chain 1 in between. So it's all the way around, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1 in every stitch. When you get back to the beginning, chain 1 and slip stitch to the top of that chain 2 to join it. Clip it. Insert your hook into a space and pull through. I've got here an Angora. You could do a Myhre, just some alternate yarn. Slip stitch into that space, chain 3, slip stitch back into the same space. Ignore the double crochet, go into the next space, slip stitch, chain 3, slip stitch in the same space all the way around. So you've got 8 petals, and then just slip stitch into that first stitch to join them. Cut that yarn or rip it, depending on the yarn you have. Tie a knot between the Angora ends. We're going to get rid of those ends soon. Tie a nice good knot, weave in the ends in the back, and then you can clip those off. Now here, instead of weaving in the little ends of the initial yarn, the sock yarn, what I'm doing is I'm just digging in, finding a stitch, and using those tails to chain to make little curly cues. If you chain them really tight, it'll sort of wave in on itself and get kind of curly. It's kind of fun. Go all the way until you can't go anymore, and then just pull that tiny little end through, and then just pull it tight, and then you've got some little curly cues. And then, of course, repeat for the other side. So this little tiny scrap of fabric, you can take one end and pull out the cross threads to make it sort of wavy and frilly on the side. Run your fingernail over the edge and sort of frill it up. Thread a sewing needle with a single strand of poly thread and do a running stitch up the other side that you didn't fray all the way to the end, and then gather it to make a fan, and then tie a knot on that side to keep the gathers in place. And then just use your fingers to fan everything out, make it lay flat so it's not twisted. And then this you're just going to stitch on to the back of this little flower. Use the same thread, of course. And then just take a few stitches just to hold it in place. Flip it over, make sure you like the placement, and then stitch the ends down so that you can just see the round part of the fan coming out. And stitch those in place. You can pull some more threads, run your finger, and over time, those can fan out more. However frilly you want it, that's how many threads you're going to pull out. And then you've got this little fancy flower. So these are fun little kooky shapes and such a great way to use up like threads and bits. We're going to work the circle first, and this time instead of a magic ring, go ahead and chain, I think I chained around 15 here, right? And then bring the end up, slip stitch in the first chain to join it into a circle. The little tail out of the way. Chain 1, make as many single crochets into the ring as will fit. And you may have to slide them down. Remember, we're not going into any actual stitch here. We're going directly into the ring, so it's really fast. And as you work, gather them. So just pull them down towards the beginning and then keep making single crochets. It's just that simple. Slip stitch into the first single crochet to join. It's a pretty versatile little piece that you can add to quilts, make little frames to put around a fussy cut piece of fabric. These things are really fun. You can see that this is just a random piece of fabric. I'm not even cutting it to a square. I'm just rolling it up, take the other end, fold it so there's no raw edges on the long side. The two short ends are raw edges, but that's okay. That sort of adds to the piece as we're going to be putting these yarn ends in there. But basically here you're just stitching it up, do a little blind stitch, hem stitch, whatever you have to do. This is, again, a poly thread. And I use a lot of polyester thread just because it's so strong. I do a lot of gathering, and, it doesn't fuzz up. So as long as I don't need the thread to stay in place, I'm totally fine with poly thread. Typically when I'm appliquing, I like cotton thread because it just stays in place. But for these kinds of things, poly thread's just fine. Okay, when you get to the top, we're going to hide that seam with these size 11 seed beads that are left over from my kit. So replace that thread with a beading needle and begin to pick up these teeny tiny little beads. I did 15 of them. Gather them all down, lay them across your piece, and then just knot it at the end. Hold everything in place and make little knots. Insert the needle into the fabric and come up 2 beads away. Take the thread and place it in between those 2 beads and hold it in place. What we're doing right now is we're just couching these beads down, otherwise it'll just flap and pull and eventually loosen up. So we don't have to do every bead here. That's a little over the top. So every 2 beads, you can see what I'm doing, is I'm placing that bead thread in between, taking a stitch into the fabric and coming up 2 beads away. Okay, all the way up to the top. I ran the beading needle through all the beads again, and then I knotted it down here at the bottom. From the bottom, insert your crochet hook and gather up, just lay out maybe 7, 8 pieces of old clippings from yarns and threads. In the middle of them, take your hook and pull them through so that you've got a loop here. We're going to hold that in place with a smaller ring. So maybe this time we're going to just go ahead and chain 10. Before you join it, just put the other end through that loop you've made. Get it into a ring by taking that first chain and working a slip stitch. And then same thing, we're going to run a bunch of single crochets into that ring. Pull the single crochets down towards behind the end where you started and keep moving that chain so that you can do a completed ring of single crochets. Okay, and then of course when you get back to the end, work a slip stitch into that first chain, clip everything, pull everything tight, and then weave in those ends. And of course, you know what I'm going to say. Save all those ends into your ends pile. And you've got this kooky little thing that I don't know what to do with it yet. I'm waiting for your comments. So yeah, the first thing that pops into your mind, I'd love to hear what you have to say about these little kooky things. And my mind, of course, goes straight to the coral reef. Everything could be a coral reef. So once your mind gets locked in on something, it's sort of hard to think about what else you could make. So I'd love to hear any ideas that you have for these little shapes that we're making. Right, here's another kind of funky little coral reef type of shape. And another great way to end up just using little scraps. Take a piece of fabric and cut it into a circle. Looks like maybe that's a 2-inch circle. I don't know, 1.5. Doesn't really matter. Vary up the sizes too, because that's more interesting. And with your threaded needle with poly thread, knot on the end, start to gather 1/8 of an inch away from those raw edges and gather it all the way around. And I do this with the wrong side of the circle facing me. As you're all the way around, gently pull the thread so that the piece gathers. And this is going to take a little bit of adjustment. You know, gather it as tightly as you can, push all those raw edges into the middle, and manipulate it so that the raw edges are touching each other. And the piece is relatively round and gathered evenly around the whole circle, as much as you can. You know, again, we're definitely not going for any sort of perfect shape here. We're just playing around with our ends and challenging ourselves to make something really cool. Once your raw edges are together and gathered, what I do is I just run through the whole thing again to keep the gathers in place. Now, if you don't want the raw edges here, you could have definitely folded under the raw edge and stitched right on top of the seam allowance. When you gather it, then you'll have a yo-yo that doesn't have any raw edges. I kind of like the raw edges here because we are using scraps, and I just kind of want to keep it shabby chic, you know, just, it's okay that things are fraying a little bit. I mean, that's sort of the handmade look of the piece, so I'm good with that. But if that bugs you, again, just curl under the seam allowance. But in any event, once you're all the way around, come up through one of the gathers and place a size 8 seed bead, or whatever seed bead. You could do crystals here, you could do a bunch of little ones. Just play around. This is the beauty of using up scraps, whatever you have. You're going to have different things than I have, of course. You may want to do a button, whatever. Once your front is decorated how you want to, go ahead and knot it in the back. Slide the needle up to exit out the edge of your piece. And here's the fun part. Here's where you can just take a clump of thread clippings, yarn clippings, and stitch them on to the side. You know, run the length of the yarn so that the other end is coming out the bottom. And as you can see here, I'm just stabbing the thread into the fabric piece and the yarn piece, holding it in place. And then just take little bits, maybe 5 or 6, and stitch those in place. And just work slowly here. Your thread's going to get caught up on all this stuff, so pull through slow. Try to hit every thread. Come in from the front, go in from the back. It doesn't really matter. You can hardly see that thread. It's the other beautiful thing about really thin poly. And add as many as you want to. Just keep adding pieces. Stitching them, getting them in place. Flip it over, and then take your thread and just stitch them down on the other side and gather them where you want to. And you can manipulate them a little so that they're sort of curving in. Keep them wild and random. And if coral reef is the destination for these motifs, well, you've just got some more. And it's a fast, quick way to use up bits of nothing. This one's really fun. This is sort of like I call it a ravioli. We could call it a showcase ravioli. A lot of times when I'm knitting or crocheting or making something, I keep all those little thread pieces in a pile, and that's where I'm like, oh, that's so pretty just how it is. So we're actually going to just leave it how it is. So take 2 squares of fabric. I think it's less than 2 inches. In the top one, the one that you want to be on the top, cut a circle out. You see what I just did there? I just folded it in half, cut a little circle. It is by no means a perfect circle. It doesn't matter. Try to leave half of an inch around the edge though, because we're going to stitch around it and then stitch in the middle. On the bottom fabric, gather just a clump of beautiful threads that you've gotten from the project. This is, of course, Whitish Wedding Gypsy Satchel leftovers. And if it's too heavy, pull some out. You can always add some in. I've got a needle threaded with size 8 pearl cotton. And from the back, I'm just going to come up and tack these in place in different various places until I'm out of thread, basically. This is a really fun way to manipulate the fibers and just lay them down. Be very serendipitous about this and hold them in place. Here you can also be working French knots. You can put beads. You can showcase a button. So many ideas. And again, please, I'd love to hear your comments. Something that you might have, like a super special button, might go beautifully in the center. Okay. Once you've got your fibers in place, pin the top part on, obviously the one that has the circle cut out. And we're going to run a blanket stitch around the edge. This is 3 strands of DMC floss. Just come out the back somewhere, as long as your thread is at the top. I hold that around my finger just to hold it in place. And I'm going in 1/8 of an inch over and 1/8 of an inch down, straight through both fabrics. So you can see I'm not at the top or anything. I'm not going to run the risk of fraying the edge of the fabric, of course, because we're working raw edges here. But the nice thing about the blanket stitch is that the top part of the stitch is going to run along the raw edges and really cover them up. You're going to get a little bit of fraying, and again, I think that's really pretty, so I just leave it. I'm good with it. And just work the blanket stitch. It really helps. You see how I'm locking that thread over my finger and holding it with my middle finger? That really helps. In the corner, angle the thread out so that the stitch is meeting at the corner. Then take another little stitch here to hold it in place. So you see I'm going over that top thread and just encircling it, stabbing it through both fabrics, pulling it tight, and then you can just move on and continue stitching all the way around the ravioli. If you run out of thread here, just knot it off in the middle and then take a new piece of thread and come up right at the top of the thread. See where my thread is coming out right there? Just so it looks like we haven't run out of thread and we're continuing along. If the fibers get unruly, just take your needle and push them in and under. Okay, once you're all the way around, take your 3 strands of thread, or of course you could do a different thread here if you've run out, whatever, and work the blanket stitch so that the top part of that stitch will run the perimeter of the inner circle, hiding the raw edges of that circle. And then as you're stabbing in, just make sure that your needle is perpendicular to the edge of that circle so that the spokes are going straight in. Don't angle it up or down. I mean, you can if you want to, whatever. But if you do it, consistently do it. You don't want it to look out of place. You don't want everything to be perfect and then you've got this weird angled spoke. Okay, when you're done, insert that needle back into the starting place. And here you can take the opportunity to tack a few more stitches down, maybe put some more beads in. Maybe this is a good time to put that button. My son brought me some buttons one time from Thailand that I'm saving. And these would be really cool in the center with, surrounded by all these different light color threads. I think that'd be really beautiful. Once you're done, if you can do a couple of these, you've just used all of your scraps, put them together, and you can make a really cool art piece. Even little mini quilt blocks, for a wall hanging. So have fun and play and use your imagination, and wow, what a great way to use up those thread clippings. Here's a really quick way to use up a length of ribbon, and these are size 6 seed beads. What you're going to do is take a smaller bead. So I've got a double strand of poly on a needle, right? And I put a size 8 seed bead, which is smaller than my main beads that I'm going to use, and tie a knot. And that's your stopper. Then stab the ribbon at the end. Try to come up straight through the middle of the ribbon, and then pick up a bead. Take that ribbon and just put it on top of your needle. Try to get into the center. Pick up a bead. Stab that ribbon in the center again. And then, make sure that it's in the center. Just kind of keep eyeing it up. And then pick up a bead. And keep doing that until you've got the length of ribbon candy that you want, or until the beads are used up. You can make a really long one here too, and coil it and make something pretty sweet with that. Okay, keep gathering the ribbon, picking up beads into the end. And then basically you just put your end bead, your size 8 seed bead on, tie a knot, run your needle down the length of them, and you have these little ribbon candy pieces. Hopefully you've gotten a few ideas from these little motifs that I've shared with you today, and learned one way to go from this to this. So December 8th, next week, I am going to show you how to use interfacing and double-sided fusible to work with some of these scraps. December 15th, I'm going to show you how to do my method scrapplique that I shared on the quiltshow.com. December 22nd, we're going to do some mosaic collage work. And on the 29th, then, of course, we'll do the drawing and the contest. So please comment here. I will be waiting for you and watching for you. Let me know some of your ideas. Let me know what you're working on. Share some pictures. And definitely join the Mandala Unplugged Facebook group, as you can look back through all of the photos that we did with Mandala Unplugged, A Little Birdie Told Me, and this last project, a gypsy satchel. And as of this taping, I do still have a few gypsy satchel kits left on my Etsy store at Myhre Designs. And also, if you go to AnnMyhreQuilts.com, you can find a materials list and a supply list for every project that we've done so far. So thanks again, and we will see you next week.